okay? All right, just reassure him, pat him on the shoulder.
Harrison Okene, the man who survived 3 days in a bubble. You're trapped in complete darkness, 100 feet underwater. You're wearing nothing but boxer shorts. The air around you is turning toxic. The freezing water can stop your heart, and even if you swim to the surface, the nitrogen in your blood will kill you instantly. This nightmare wasn't fiction. It happened to a man named Harrison Okene. He should have been dead within minutes, but instead, he survived for 3 days on the seafloor. When rescue divers finally found him, they weren't looking for survivors. They were looking for bodies. What they discovered instead was something almost no human has ever become by accident. An aquanaut, someone who lives long enough under pressure for their body chemistry to fundamentally change. But how did he get there? To understand, we need to go back to May 26, 2013, when a tug water started flooding in. He forced the door open and moved into the passageway, trying to reach the exit hatch in pitch darkness. 3 crew members were ahead of him. Then the full surge came, a wall of water slamming through the corridor with enough force to carry a human body like debris. Okene watched all 3 men disappear into the black water. He knew immediately they were dead. The water pressure forced him backward, away from his only exit. He fought through another doorway into the officers' cabins as the entire tugboat rolled completely upside down and began its descent to the ocean floor. The Jaskin 4 was sinking, and Okene was trapped inside it. What he didn't know, the ship would come to rest 30 meters down. He didn't know about the 11 other crew members, most of whom had followed anti-piracy protocols and locked themselves in their cabins, a security measure that became a death trap. He didn't know he was about to spend 60 hours in an environment that would fundamentally alter his body chemistry. He thought the rising water would kill him within hours. What he didn't know was that the real danger had only just begun. In total darkness, Okene could only trust his hands and the freezing water rising around him. He felt his way along walls, through doorways, searching for any space where the water wasn't. His hands found the engineer's office. Air. There was air here. The ship had inverted completely, and somehow, a pocket of air had been trapped in this room, compressed against what was now the ceiling but had been the floor. The space was roughly 4 feet high. The water filled it to waist depth. Okene pulled himself up, gasping. He was alive, but barely. Nearly naked, soaking wet, in total darkness at the bottom of the ocean. He began to explore his prison by touch. His hands found a life vest. Inside it, 2 small flashlights. He stuffed them into his shorts. Then, he found tools, scattered equipment from the office. Over the next hours, he used these to construct a crude platform, something to keep his torso above the waterline. The effort warmed him slightly. The water remained bitterly cold. The air pocket existed because of physics. When the ship inverted and sank, air trapped inside couldn't escape. The water pressure at 30 meters was forcing it upward against the hull. But that same pressure, roughly 4 times normal atmospheric pressure, was compressing the air. Okene was breathing under conditions similar to what deep-sea divers experience. His lungs were taking in compressed air with every breath. This compression would save his life and doom any chance of escape. With every breath at 30 meters depth, nitrogen from the air was dissolving into his blood and tissues at accelerated rates. After just a few hours, his body would begin to saturate, reaching equilibrium with the pressure around him. This is what saturation divers train for. This is what aquanauts experience during long-term underwater missions. Okene had found air, but it was a trap. Every breath was quietly poisoning him, and soon, survival itself would become the greatest threat. In the pitch-black silence, hours blurred into each other until time itself seemed to vanish. Okene conserved his flashlights, using them only briefly to check his surroundings, before returning to blackness. Hours passed. He had no way to measure them. The cold seeped deeper into his body despite the platform. His skin began to feel strange, wrinkled, softened by the constant immersion. His mind began to work on memories. His wife, Akpavona, whom he'd married 5 years earlier. They had no children yet. His mother, his friends, the colleagues he'd watched die. He wondered if they locked themselves in their cabins as protocol required. He wondered if they'd suffered. To maintain structure, he turned to prayer. His wife had sent him Psalm 54 by text message before this voyage. He recited it repeatedly. "O God, by your name, save me." The repetition created rhythm, a way to mark time when physical markers had vanished. This became his ritual, his method of staying connected to consciousness when external stimuli had almost completely disappeared. Sensory deprivation does specific things to the human mind. Without the visual input, the brain begins to manufacture its own. Without sound beyond his own breathing and the water's movement, auditory processing centers can start generating phantom noises. Without regular time cues, like sunrise, meals, or activity, the circadian rhythm collapses. Okene was experiencing all of this. His grip on how long he'd been trapped began to slip almost immediately. The darkness protected him in one way. He couldn't see the bodies of his colleagues, couldn't see the full horror of his environment, but it also removed any external anchor for his thoughts. But his mind wasn't his only enemy. The air itself was slowly turning toxic.
Solar light went off. I couldn't see anything. The whole place was dark, like nothing. If someone can even pass me 10 times, I will not recognize that somebody's passing by. So I was just there like that.
At some point, Okene noticed his breathing had changed. His chest tighter, every breath a little harder. What he couldn't know was that this was already day 2. His chest felt tight. Each breath required more effort. He was panting slightly, even while sitting still. His thoughts felt slower, slightly disconnected. He was experiencing the early stages of carbon dioxide toxicity, though he had no way to know it. The primary threat wasn't oxygen running out, it was carbon dioxide building up. Every exhaled breath added CO2 to the air pocket in a confined space at depth. This accumulation accelerates. At 50,000 parts per million, carbon dioxide produces a buzz, a high feeling. At 70,000 parts per million, unconsciousness comes rapidly. Eric Hextall, a diving medicine specialist at Duke University, later analyzed Okene's air pocket. Based on the volume, roughly 13.5 cubic meters, he estimated 56 hours before CO2 toxicity would begin causing serious symptoms. After 79 hours, unconsciousness would be nearly certain. Okene was found at hour 60.
Okay.
He was inside the survival window, but approaching its edge.
All right.
What extended that window was water,
All right.
carbon dioxide that increased with pressure. At 30 meters depth, the pressure was high enough to enhance this absorption significantly, and Okene, moving around his platform, splashing, adjusting his position, was inadvertently increasing the water's surface area. More surface area meant more CO2 absorption. This simple chemistry, happening without his knowledge or intent, bought him the extra hours he needed. There was another threat accumulating silently. Nitrogen. At sea level, nitrogen makes up about 78% of air and does nothing to us. But at 4 atmospheres of pressure, nitrogen behaves differently. It dissolves into blood and tissues. After extended exposure, it saturates them completely. Okene's body was reaching equilibrium with the compressed air around him. His blood, his muscles, his organs were slowly filling with dissolved nitrogen. This created a trap. If he somehow escaped the wreck and swam upward, the decreasing pressure would cause the nitrogen to come out of solution rapidly. It would form bubbles in his blood, his joints, his brain. This is decompression sickness, the bends. It causes paralysis, stroke, death. The depth that was keeping him alive was also making him a prisoner. The third threat was temperature. Water at 30 meters off Nigeria is cold enough to cause hypothermia, the dangerous drop in core body temperature that leads to confusion, unconsciousness, death. Okene had one advantage. His platform kept his upper body out of the water. Only his legs remained submerged. This reduced the surface area losing heat, buying him time against the cold. But he was still losing body heat steadily. He was still shivering. The cold, the nitrogen, the poisoned air, each one a death sentence on its own. Together, they formed an impossible trap, and Okene had no idea rescue was even coming. After nearly 60 hours in silence, a sound cut through the darkness. Metal striking metal. Faint, but undeniable. Not a phantom noise generated by his starved auditory system. Something outside the ship. Then, light. A beam cutting through the water in the passageway beyond his air pocket. A diver's light. Okene made a decision. If he stayed on his platform and the diver passed by, he might not be seen. The space was dark. The visibility was poor. He had to act. He jumped into the water and moved toward the passage where the light had appeared. A figure in diving gear swam past. Okene reached out and touched the diver's arm. The diver was Nico van Heerden, a South African working for DCN Diving. He and his team were there to recover bodies, not to find survivors. 3 days had passed since the Jackson 4 went down. No one expected anyone to be alive. Van Heerden's camera captured the moment. His hand jerks back. His breathing accelerates through the regulator. Then recognition. This is a living person. The control room monitoring the dive erupted. Tony Walker, the project manager, said later, "It was a shock for the diver while he was down there looking for bodies, and we shot back when the hand grabbed him on the screen." Okene had pulled his hand back immediately, after touching Van Heerden, trying not to startle him. He waved slightly. Van Heerden moved closer, placed a hand on Okene's shoulder, a gesture of reassurance. Then he signaled for equipment. The discovery was pure accident. The DCN diving team had been 17 hours away, working on a pipeline project, when they received word of the Jackson 4 sinking. They were already in saturation, living at 70 meters depth in pressurized chambers on their support vessel. During the transit to the wreck site, they decompressed to 30 meters to match the depth where the tugboat had settled. Their mission: to recover the 12 bodies expected to be inside. They'd already retrieved 4 corpses from the unstable wreck. The ship was upside down, filled with silt and debris. With poor visibility, security doors were latched from the inside. It was grim. Difficult work. Finding Okene alive was beyond any prediction. Okene couldn't simply swim to the surface. The rescue team understood this immediately. After 60 hours at 4 atmospheres of pressure, his blood and tissues were saturated with nitrogen. Bringing him up rapidly would trigger massive decompression sickness. The solution required precision. First, Van Heerden and his team fitted Okene with a diving helmet underwater, supplying him with breathable gas. Then they had to get him out of the wreck and into the diving bell, a pressurized capsule that would maintain the same pressure he'd been living under. This transfer was dangerous. Okene had to move through flooded passages, through tight spaces, trusting equipment he'd never used before, following divers he just met. He had to do this while his body was already comprised by cold, by CO2 exposure, by 60 hours of stress and isolation. During the transfer, Okene lost consciousness. The team maintained pressure and continued the transfer. The bell brought him to the surface, but not to normal atmospheric pressure. The bell locked onto the decompression chamber at the surface, and Okene was moved inside while maintaining that same 4 atmosphere pressure environment. Then began the slow decompression. Over roughly 60 hours, nearly as long as he'd spent trapped underwater, the chamber's pressure was gradually reduced. This allowed the nitrogen dissolved in Okene's body to off-gas safely through his lungs. Too fast and bubbles would form. Too fast and the rescue would become another way to die. On the surface, medical experts were consulted in real time. Dive supervisors monitored Okene's condition. He was given an oxygen-helium mixture instead of normal air, a non-standard choice, but necessary given his saturated state. When technician Alex Gibbs saw the rescue video later, he noted Okene's panting and glazed expression. By the time he had been found, CO2 was at clearly high level, Gibbs explained. You can see him panting in the video, and his slightly glazed eyes caused by this. After roughly 60 hours in the decompression chamber, Okene was finally brought to normal atmospheric pressure. He emerged with skin peeling off from his hands and feet, suffering from intense hunger and plagued by nightmares. But he was alive. The total ordeal, 60 hours underwater, 60 hours in the chamber, against every law of physics, against every statistical chance. Harrison Okene had done the impossible. He had returned from a grave at the bottom of the sea. Surviving the ocean was one thing. Surviving life afterward was another. He didn't attend the funerals of his colleagues. He feared their families' reactions. The unspoken question, why did you survive when they didn't? Even his priest asked if he'd used black magic. Okene was shocked that a religious leader would suggest such a thing, but the question reflected something deeper. Suspicion toward impossible survival. The cultural assumption that there must be a hidden explanation. His wife described the nightmare. Okene would wake suddenly, shouting that the bed was sinking, that they were in the sea. His mind remained trapped even as his body was free. He vowed never to go near the ocean again. He'd made a deal with God while underwater. If rescued, he would stay on land. He got a job cooking in a restaurant, but the nightmares continued. The marriage began to fracture under the weight of his trauma. By 2015, he and his wife had separated. Okene fell into depression. No children, no wife, no purpose. He lived alone with his dog and told no one how empty he felt. Then, in 2014, came the second water. Okene's car plunged off a bridge into a river. He managed to free himself and swim to the surface. As he gasped air, he realized his friend was still trapped in the sinking vehicle below him. The water that had nearly killed him was about to kill someone else. Okene made a choice. He asked himself, "What are you afraid of? How can you be scared? You have seen so much. If you have come through this, I think you should not be afraid of anything." He dove back down. He found his friend. He brought him to the surface. They both survived. This moment became the pivot. Okene realized that avoiding water hadn't freed him from it. The fear remained. The nightmares continued. For the second time, water had nearly claimed him, and for the second time, it gave him a reason to fight back. The man who swore he'd never touch the ocean again made a radical decision: to become a diver. His family thought he was mad. His brother told him not to do it, worried for his safety. But Okene persisted. The 3-month course was difficult. The cold water brought back visceral memories. Poor visibility triggered panic. He struggled, but he didn't quit. He placed 4th out of 17 students and earned his International Marine Contractors Association Class 2 certificate. At the graduation ceremony, the instructor presenting his diploma was Nico Van Heerden, the man who had found him alive at the bottom of the Atlantic. Van Heerden said, "Once you saved someone's life, you share a bond with that person very few people would understand." Okene now works as a commercial diver, regularly descending to depths of 50 meters or more, deeper than where he nearly died. He installs and repairs oil and gas infrastructure. Every descent took him deeper than the place where he almost died, and every ascent proved he had finally reclaimed the ocean. Today, Harrison Okene makes his living in the very world that once tried to bury him. He descends regularly to 50 meters, sometimes deeper, installing and repairing oil platforms in the same waters off Nigeria where the Jackson 4 sank. When asked about his work, he says simply, "I believe the ocean is my world. I feel more comfortable relaxed there. The ocean at 30 meters didn't care about Harrison Okene. It followed its physics without malice or mercy. The pressure, the cold, the chemistry. None of it was personal. What nearly killed him wasn't cruelty. It was circumstance. But returning to that environment after trauma, that required something the ocean could never possess. It required will. Every time Okene descends now, he passes through that depth. 30 meters, the place where the Jackson 4 rests. The place where he sat in darkness, believing he would die. He passes through it on his way to work. The prison became a waypoint. The end became a beginning. The bubble of 30 meters kept him alive, but his choice to dive back in, that's what gave him life.